Hi, this is Jim Nariel from the Elite Fat Loss Masterclass.com, and right now I've joined me Mr. Abel James, who is the best-selling author and a fat loss coach, and no less, and the creator of the Lean Body System. Now, it's a super way to build a healthy, strong, and lean body, no less, and has a ton more, obviously. Now, I know Abel has some great and amazing stuff to share today, but that being said, Abel, welcome to the call. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me, Jim. I'm doing awesome.
Fantastic. Okay then. So obviously, before we actually get started into the main sort of information, main content here, could you tell me a little bit about yourself, like how you got started in the fat loss industry, and what sort of motivated you to start learning and getting a great and lean body?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that was a motivator for me to spread the word to other people is learning that everything I thought I knew about health was wrong.
All right.
So going back to my childhood, I had always been really interested in health. My mom was a she was interested in homeopathy, naturopathic nurse practitioner, and so I was raised on herbs and weird concoctions and all of that whenever I got sick. And we also, ate foods from our backyard. And I got into being a vegetarian for a while, kind of hopped on that train. It turned out that it didn't work out particularly well for me. I was a runner and still am, and my performance was going downhill. I was craving steak if I ever hit the weight room, and it all kind of came to a head when I was working in corporate consulting in DC, actually, and quit my job, moved to Austin with everything I had, really focused on work at that time and kind of getting my life together. And I came home on a Friday night, and everything I had was up in flames. My apartment building was just a 30-foot wall of flames, and I was left with the clothes that I was wearing. So it was this wild journey of trying to get everything together, having, kind of artificially uprooted myself and just moved to Austin, Texas, and then losing everything. It was just this wild adventure where I felt that everything was out of my control. My health started going downhill. I had all these afflictions that I'd never had a problem with before. I had kidney stones. I was getting more acne. I was putting on weight. I was super inflamed. I got swine flu before like anyone else got swine flu. It was just getting out of hand. So I realized that if there was one thing that I could have under my control, it was my health. So I really hit the books, studied medical journals for years, and wound up writing a book myself. What I found was that the things that I was doing, the very things I was doing that I thought would make me healthy, like eating soy, low fat, exercising, tons of cardio, lots of running, these things were the things that were leading to the downturn of my health.
Really? So you're a vegetarian quite a long time, is that right? From when you were a boy to when you were out at work and that sort of thing?
It was on and off. I would do it for a while, for a few years, and then I would stop doing it, and then I would do it again. I think the reason I kept, I'm definitely a very dedicated person, but the reason I didn't stick with it is just because it wasn't working, whether I accepted that or not. It wasn't giving the results I wanted.
All right, and you have to go through quite a bit of adversity, with the fire and all that sort of stuff before you actually come up to and learn how to do it properly yourself.
Absolutely, and it was at that moment where I kind of questioned everything in my life and everything that I'd ever learned, and it wasn't until I started dabbling in the fringes and looking into bodybuilding techniques and all of that I really started to see some patterns in what would lead to effective results when it came to fat loss and building muscle, and it's not the things that most people think.
Oh wow! Okay. Well, sort of stepping onto what you sort of discovered, I suppose. This whole program is around the Elite Fat Loss Masterclass, which is based on the best sort of fat loss strategies. So, sort of cutting to the chase here, can you share your sort of say 3 to 5 best fat loss strategies for losing weight, and obviously in the safest kind of way?
Yeah, my biggest thing, and one thing that I always say to my listeners and my readers, is it's very simple. Just eat real food. You see all these bodybuilding supplements and shakes out there and drugs. You don't need all of that junk. And in fact, in the long term, that's probably going to hurt you and hurt your progress. What I always do is tell folks to read the ingredients on everything they put in their body. And if you see anything that you don't recognize, then skip it. So that's number one. That's really the most important point that goes through everything that I do. Eat real food. The other thing that's really important is get rid of most of the carbs that you're used to eating. And I'll go into two different pieces of that. The first is, of course, sugar, and then the second would be to actually eliminate grains. So I'll start with sugar. When the low-fat craze hit, what these food manufacturers did was basically fat is flavor. So when you take it out, you're left with the cardboard, or if it's yogurt, it just tastes like nothing. It's good. And so what they do instead is add sugar. They add sweetness because they want to give it some semblance of flavor. And in a lot of cases today, they add artificial sweeteners, which I'm no fan of either. And when they do that, even if it's, say, a 100-calorie pack, right? What happens when you have one of those? I don't know if you have those across the pond, but in America, we have these little things. They're full of Oreos or Cheez-Its or whatever.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We have them as well.
When you eat the 5 Oreos that's in there, you're famished still, right? So you reach for another one, you keep eating it. So it doesn't matter if it has 100 calories in it if you keep eating it. And that's one of the things that sugar does. When you have a little bit of sugar, you want to eat more. But really, it's not rocket science. Sugar makes you fat. In fact, sugar is the thing that really makes you fat, not fat itself. Fat is kind of a misnomer in the way that we talk about it. I'm a huge fat fan. I eat at least 60 to 70% of my calories from fat, and it allows me to get some spectacular results. So the first thing I encourage people to do is wean themselves off of sugar. And that's a journey in and of itself, but it's absolutely worth it. Once you stop eating it, you don't really want it anymore. It's kind of like a punch in the mouth when you eat something that's really sugary. The second piece, and this is probably more surprising to people, is I encourage my listeners and my fans to eliminate grains from their diets, and even whole grains. Now, whole grains have been touted as this superfood, this health food.
Yeah.
Full of fiber and full of nutrients. The problem is your body can't really turn them into nutrients that it can use. Whole grains, and specifically wheat, is a far cry from what it began as being when it was incorporated into the human diet thousands of years ago. Since the advent of agriculture, we've encountered smaller statures, decreased bone density, mineral and nutrient deficiencies, just a laundry list of these effects that are a direct result of eating foods that our bodies aren't well adapted to eat, and primarily that includes grains. And basically, I'll try to make a long story short. There are some great books about it that are coming out these days. Wheat Belly is one. Dr. Davis was just on my show, and he talks about how wheat up to about the 1970s, and the wheat we have today is completely different. It's something that your body recognizes as kind of an evil. And my friend Mark Sisson was actually on the national news, and he just blurted out that gluten and wheat is just a poison. And I would kind of agree with that. And I found that when I took it out of my diet, I certainly that's when I started to get some really awesome results, and I encourage that everyone else at least try it.
Right. So it's wheat out and sugar out. So okay. So I've been looking at your website, and you say you don't need to eat less and exercise more, as everyone sort of believes. That must be that's the thing I was thinking. But eat and exercise differently.
Exactly.
What do you mean by sort of differently?
Okay, so I eat a lot. I've always been a hungry dude.
Yeah.
Love food. I eat tons and tons of fat. And, people point their fingers at me and they're just like, what? No sugar? No grains? That's ridiculous. But if people have ever heard of paleo, it's close to that. It's close to an ancestral diet. And so what I say about you don't need to exercise harder. You don't need to follow a diet necessarily. You're not reducing calories. What you do is you eat differently. So instead of eating a whole grain bagel with low fat cream cheese for breakfast, which I think is disgusting anyway, and I think people are probably, if they think that they like it, they're probably deluding themselves. What I eat for breakfast tends to be like bacon and eggs with cheese. I have heavy cream in my coffee. And so,
really? Wow. I was quite surprised.
It's so delicious, and that's what has enabled me. There are different ways to get down to having a six-pack. You can starve yourself, which is very effective for a little while, or you can eat right and eat in a certain way. And so for me, for example, being a vegetarian, that was kind of hard. you know? And some would argue that doing what I do now is kind of hard, but I would say it's not, because it's so easy to eat delicious food every single day, every single meal. And so that's what I do. This is much easier than being a vegetarian, I would say, with absolute certainty. And when it comes to exercise, I run marathons. I did that for a while, running, 50 more miles a week. That's hard also. That's
Yeah.
really hard. When I started, scaling back on some of that exercise and started incorporating high intensity exercise and focusing on weight training for just a few minutes a week, that's when I really started seeing some huge results in my body composition. So I built, 20 pounds of muscle. I was down to, I'm 5'9", and when I was running marathons, I was down to 148, which is small for me. Like I'm not really a small, skinny guy. I'm more of a mesomorph. So that was just tiny. And now I'm more around 170, and I have lower body fat now than I did when I was running marathons. So it's, like I said, just a few minutes of exercise a week. I focus on sprints and high intensity, weight training and intervals. And that's really what makes up my exercise routine. So it's not exercising more, it's exercising differently.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I heard that you need to, rather than go for a long jog, as you talk about in marathons, you need to actually go for very short but real intense sprints and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah, you want to make yourself huff and puff, no matter how fit you are.
Right. Okay. Cool. Okay. And you find people who are in different levels of weight loss or fat loss. Some people have had some success and they have reached this real sort of frustrating plateau and can't go any further than that. What would your best advice be in that situation?
So it really depends on where the person is, but some advice that I think applies pretty much across the board is step one, you really want to make sure that your diet is clean. Like what you're eating needs to be real food. You need to be sticking with it. And a lot of times people will be like, oh yeah, I'm doing great. And then I'll ask them, well, have you actually scaled back on the sugar that you're eating? And they're just like, well, today I had a bunch of jam with my breakfast and, I caved and I had a soda and all this. And it's like, well, that's what it is. That's, try to take that out. And what I say to people is, try it for 3 weeks, try it for 30 days. If you can't stick to it, try it again. Just go for it, because the results will absolutely come. So, the first thing is definitely try to examine what you're doing if it's not working, and make sure that you're following what you're supposed to be following. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to follow my approach. It's probably not right for everyone. I don't think that any dietary approach is right for everyone. But you need to stick to whatever you're trying. Another thing that a lot of people just kind of skip right over is sleep. That is something that is so important. And it goes hand in hand with stress. Doesn't matter how much you exercise, how well you eat, if your sleep and your stress are out of order, if your life is out of control, then you're probably not going to get the results that you need. So one thing that I encourage people to do is make sure that your room when you're sleeping is as quiet and as dark as possible. Try to a cave. I have something that I call my head fortress, which is super nerdy and makes me look really stupid. Yeah. It's just a mask over my eyes so I can't see anything, and I have earplugs. And whenever I'm traveling, I put those in, and that really has helped me enormously get better sleep, because I've never been a good sleeper. And then of course there's the stress thing, and there are lots of ways you can reduce stress, but the one that I encourage people to try is just finding something that you love and doing it every day.
All right. Okay. So how out of interest, how does sleep help your endeavors in losing fat loss, as it were? How does that help you?
So if you're stressed, if you're not getting sleep, your cortisol, which is a hormone that basically interrupts fat burning, goes through the roof. And so that's the same hormone that's released when you get run over by a truck.
All right.
Burning fat and losing fat is not high priority for your body. It's survival. And if you're constantly stressed, or if you're not sleeping, and like I said, those go hand in hand, then your body is not going to prioritize fat loss. One thing that's really interesting, some of the people who I coach, they won't change a thing. Their exercise, they're doing great. Their diet, is right on line, and then they're all of a sudden getting this little belly. And I'm like, what's going wrong? Like, tell me what's happening in your life right now. And they're just like, well, I can't sleep. And so there are lots of biochemical mechanisms for why that happens. But I'll just suffice it to say, I know we don't have tons of time, that people really need to not skip over that. Just try everything you can to make sure you're getting a solid 7 to 9 hours. And it's kind of different for every person, but 7 to 9 is the general range that you want to shoot for.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. That's good. That's cool. Okay, and for people who haven't quite got there yet, as in starting to lose fat, lose weight, but and the sort of people that have tried everything, they've tried every diet under the sun and tried every exercise regime under the sun, nothing seems to work. What would your best bit of advice be for someone going through that sort of challenge?
Yeah, it's not complicated. If for example, you look at bodybuilders, some of these guys start out at, or girls, start out at 300 pounds. If they can do it, you can do it. Unless you have a serious medical condition, which, there are some out there for sure, you want to make sure that your thyroid is in order if you're really having trouble and doing everything right. And there are a couple of other conditions that could kind of be the exception to the rule. But mostly I think it's just an issue of compliance. Like I was saying before, you want to give it a fair shake for 30 days, for 3 weeks, 2 weeks. And when you do, and when you do it right, you will experience positive results. And one thing that's really interesting, people will try, say, Atkins as a diet, which I'm not a fan of the way that people do it practically these days, but the reason that it works is a similar reason as to why bodybuilders get cut so quickly, is because they reduce carbs. And it also, if you'll notice, when you cut out carbs, you also can't eat grains, you can't eat wheat, you can't eat legumes, really. A lot of things that people are naturally not well adapted to consume, you kind of have to cut those out automatically. And so what I encourage people to do is just make sure that they're actually doing what is said in the book of that diet. For example, Atkins again, a lot of people come to me, they're just like, tried Atkins didn't work for me. And I'm like, well, explain it to me. What should you actually be eating on the Atkins diet? They're just like, oh, I didn't read the book. I just kind of went to McDonald's and didn't eat the buns. I'm like, what it is, like actually understand what you're doing. I encourage people to understand the biochemistry just a little bit. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to, go to med school or anything like that, but try to dabble in why this works for your body and then give it a fair shake.
Right, okay. And you mentioned 30 days, and my understanding is that normally 30 days is the time it takes for the human body to actually create a habit, whether it's a good habit or bad habit. Is that what you mean by the 30-day sort of time frame to try a diet out?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to, because you're not just changing how your body operates, for example, going from burning lots of carbs to burning lots of fat. You're also changing the way that your mind works, the way that your habits are built. And so that takes, I would argue, more than 30 days, but 30 days is enough for you to start seeing usually some very compelling results.
Cool. Okay. And also, there are many claims by so many people, as the industry is so huge out there, lose 20 pounds in 5 days or 40 pounds in 20 days, that sort of thing. All sorts of claims out there. So as an expert in your field, what would you say was a reasonable challenge but not impossible goal for someone to lose weight? Now, I see that you've on your website, your story, you've lost 20 pounds in 40 days. So is that something you go by?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's interesting because it totally depends on where a person starts. Losing 20 pounds in 40 days was not difficult for me, for my body. I've had some clients who have lost far more than that in a shorter amount of time. If someone is 600 pounds, losing 10 pounds in the first week, 30 pounds in the first month, and even more in some cases can be absolutely realistic. But if you're a 100-pound woman and you want to lose 20 pounds, that's where I say, back up the bus. That's not really what you want to be aiming for. So I actually encourage people to focus more on how they feel in their clothes and how they look in the mirror, because that's really something that across the board, that's something that people can feel good about. 20 pounds, that's just a number. It could be fat, it could be water, it could be muscle that you're losing. So it's 40 pounds or 20 pounds. These are things like these. People are naturally attracted to numbers, but it's much more important to focus on how you look and feel than just some number that your scale says to you.
Right. Okay. So also I've seen before, I was interviewing someone else the other day, and they said, take pictures and that type of thing and just compare the two pictures together, rather than the scales. A lot of people use the scales, don't they, to measure how they are.
Absolutely. So one of my clients actually just sent me a picture. She gained 10 pounds. She was 120 pounds, kind of flabby. She sent her after picture, 130 pounds and ripped with just a lovely womanly body. Like muscular, but not too muscular, with a nice hourglass shape, no flab at all. And she put on 10 pounds. And that just goes to show you that it's not about what the scale says, it's about how you look and feel.
Fantastic. Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. And now sort of moving on to the mental side, what is the best way of getting yourself sort of motivated in losing weight? I know people really want to lose weight, but it's the difference between wanting to and actually doing it, and getting your mind right and getting in the right shape. It also includes, starting a program, and also continuing through it as well. How do you get your mind right to do that?
Actually, I love this question because my background is in brain science, and that was what my first book was on, the subject of brain science. So for me, it always starts with visualizing what you want to have happen, right? So if you are at the beginning of a workout, for example, and you want to have a successful workout and you're having a really hard time getting there, visualize yourself having that awesome workout. And the mind has amazing powers to make that happen. So if you're you want to try a new diet, for example, then visualize what it's going to be like, what your optimal body would look like in the mirror. And what the mind is able to do, once you kind of recalibrate this new you in your mind, you start to realize that your body is taking you there. Your habits start taking you there. But you need to really visualize it. You need to really focus on that goal. Otherwise, if you don't have goals, then you're just kind of floundering along. You don't just try a diet to see what happens. You try it to get to a certain point that's better than where you are. And one thing that I also see happen is, unfortunately, these people will have fantastic results from their body's perspective. Going back to weight, they might lose 50 pounds, they'll get a six-pack, and they're still miserable. It's because they realize it's not about the body. It's about your lifestyle. Like, are you actually happy with what you're doing? And that's why I encourage people to make their food as delicious as possible, because anyone can starve themselves. Almost anyone can starve themselves down to, a fitness model type physique or some emaciated skeletal model. And that's not ideal. So visualize yourself being happy and healthy. And I say eat to optimize the way that you feel, not necessarily the way that you look. And that's going to get you a healthy relationship with your body and with your life. And these are going to be lifestyle habits that you can incorporate into your life over the long term.
Well, and I suppose once your mind's right, it's sort of forever rather than a quick fix, being miserable and then putting all the weight back on again.
That's the point. That almost makes you feel worse, because then you look at the pictures of yourself when you're all skinny and lovely in your mind, and you're fatter than that.
Yeah.
And it didn't work. And every time you look at that picture, you're like, I feel like a fraud. It didn't work. So when you do make these changes, you want to do everything you can to make them lifelong, sustainable. And the only way to do that is to enjoy your journey.
Right, as I sort of touched on the next type of question, which is what sort of permanent, definite life changes do you need to sort of make to make sure you lose weight and also keep it off as well, or lose fat, should I say, and keep it off as well?
Yeah, eating real food is really something that, at least in America, we are so far from, and I think that's starting to spread to other countries. I know you probably have an international audience, and it's one of these things where people are now in the habit of going to the supermarket and just buying all these things from boxes. And you look at the ingredients, it takes up the whole back of the box, and it's full of all these substances that don't remotely resemble food. So one thing that I always tell people to do is, if you don't recognize something that's on the back of your box of food, for example, don't eat it. Go back 100 years. You'll see, like, you look at pictures from back then, and you don't see 400-pound, 600-pound people. You don't really see 250-pound people, but that's everywhere today. And so if you want to encounter different results than what people are getting, than what the average Joe is getting today, then you really need to do something different. And that's going back to, having a garden, eating fresh food that was just alive and well, eating animals that were healthy. And you also want to incorporate activity into your life. You can't be sitting behind a desk all day or behind a steering wheel all day and never getting any activity and expecting to be a healthy, functioning human being. It's not something that is important just for you. It's important for your family. You'll live longer. You'll be happier. And so it's really important to have a healthy relationship with your body. Trust yourself. Trust real food. Don't trust food manufacturers. They pull all sorts of shenanigans.
Right. Okay. I guess someone else has described it as if cavemen, that's it. It's good for you. That type of thing. But yeah. Also, how can you lose fat when you're someone, this type of executive that is busy on the go, only has time for some real snacky ready meals, that sort of stuff they use, which is sort of food you just mentioned that you shouldn't really have, sort of during the working day. How do you how can you manage yourself so you're eating the right stuff?
A priority. That might sound like a cop out, but when I made my, first transformation, I was working 3 jobs. I was recovering from a house fire where I'd lost everything that I had, which took an enormous amount of time. And we all have exactly the same amount of time in the day. And so if this is an important thing to you, if optimizing your health is important to you, then you can make the time. So, let's say the average person works if you sleep 8 hours a night, you have something like 4,000 hours a year where you're neither working nor sleeping. It's your free time, you could say. And so what I do, and what I encourage others to do, is make your health a priority. And so that's really as simple as it is. People, actually, I'm also a musician, and I taught guitar. And one thing that a lot of, not the kids, but the adults would say to me is, if they weren't experiencing the results that they wanted, if they couldn't play that scale or if they couldn't rock out on that tune, they're just like, what can I do? What's wrong? I'm just like, well, did you practice this week? And they're just like, no, I don't really have the time. And if I have the time, as the teacher and as someone who's working all these other jobs, then you have the time too. So it's just a matter of priorities. Could you spend 10 minutes a day not surfing the internet, taking that away from your time watching TV and instead putting in a quick workout, doing some sprints? That's what you need to do if this is important to you. So number one, I'm not going to preach to anyone that this is something that you need to do. That's a decision that you have to make. But when you make that decision, stick to it, give it a fair shake. And I would imagine that if you're anything like me or the other people that, Jim, you're interviewing, you're going to stick with it because the results become the reward.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. I know that for a fact because just by interviewing people here, I just pick up on various bits and pieces, and I've lost weight just by doing that. It's amazing.
That's great.
I've been looking at your website and just picking up some things from there. And you mentioned that you can explain about facts about how much protein you really need. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder if you can spend a little bit of time on that as to how much protein anyone really needs in their body, any one sort of amount of time to get them to the place they want to be.
Sure. It's different for everyone. Mm-hmm. I would say the majority of people are afraid of protein. They're afraid of red meat. They're afraid of meat in general, certainly afraid of bacon. Bacon is something I eat almost every day and enjoy every second of it. Uh-huh. Start by saying that most people don't eat enough. But that said, bodybuilders and other people looking to build muscle are eating way too much. You don't need 200, 300 grams of protein a day that you're just chugging from this fake protein shake. That's not really going to help you. You might get by for a little while, especially if you're young, building muscle that way, but it's not sustainable and it's not particularly good for you. So I encourage people to focus on, and like I said, it depends on if you're like a petite female or if you're an enormous man with tons of muscles, but somewhere in the ballpark of a little less than 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass. So for me, I generally eat anywhere between 75 to 160 grams of protein a day. And that depends on how hard I'm training, what my goals are at that point. But you want to make sure that your protein isn't coming from junky shakes all the time. You want to make sure it's coming from actual pasture-raised animals, from eggs, some nuts thrown in there. You want to make sure it's coming from real food sources because your body knows what to do with those.
Right, I see. And you mentioned about widespread myths around saturated fats. And you see on certain cartons, so much fat and so much saturated fat. And I'm always confused about the two and what the myths are around the saturated fats. I just wonder if you can let us know about that one.
Saturated fat, the data that pretty much everything is hinging on, and from a food manufacturing perspective, what you see in the magazines, that saturated fat clogs your arteries, gives you heart disease, is false. It's not true. And if you go back to the original research, you'll find that it was fabricated. It's really, I'm no conspiracy theorist or anything like that. You can, if you just throw it into Google, I have a couple of resources on my website as well. Saturated fat has been vilified. And that's not the real enemy. It's mostly trans fats that are horrible for you. But if you go to what saturated fat should be from healthy sources, like lard from pastured animals, animals that were treated well, and not this kind of like fake man-made fat, then it's actually good for you. And so that's one thing that it took me a long time to understand. Even when I went through the research, I'm like, no, there's no way that everyone is wrong about this. And then if you actually look at it, you actually examine the data, you'll find that saturated fat isn't the problem. It's fake.
I didn't quite catch that, Abel. Sorry. If you say fake food.
Fake food is the problem. Yeah, man-made fats are the problem, not fat in general.
Right. Okay. Good stuff. And finally, I just wondered whether you could just give us a little bit of rundown on your story a little bit. Where you lost 20 pounds in 40 days and how you went through that sort of time and that type of thing.
Absolutely. So I went from prioritizing low fat, lots of whole grains and carbs, not eating a whole lot of sugar. I never really did, and running quite a bit, to going higher protein, much higher fat, and lower carb, eliminating grains, cutting out, and once I did that, it made it easier to eliminate sugar, then focusing on sprints. And it was just almost effortless, the changes that happened in my body. And there are so many reasons for that, but one of the principal things that happened was my gut healed. It was and for most people, a lot of the metabolic disorders and autoimmune disorders that people are starting to come down with, diabetes and all this, is coming from eating the wrong foods. Too many carbs, which turn into sugar and basically give people diseases. So once you take that out of your diet, that's why I tell people, watch your carbs. If there's anything to watch, it's your carbs, not your calories, not your fat, not your protein. It's your carbs. So I took that down a notch. I tend to keep it between 50 and 150 net carbs a day these days, which is a lot less than most people are eating. And I bumped up the fat, and then I got a 6-pack.
Oh, wow.
It was fast, and I haven't turned back.
Wow, that's really cool, Abel. So I'd just like to say, well, this has really been a fantastic call. You shared some really super great stuff with us today. So everyone, the next step is to take a look at step 2 on Abel's page, taking you directly to the lean body to see exactly what Abel's been talking about today. And again, thanks a lot, Abel. It's been fantastic. This is Jim Nariel. Thanks for joining us, and everyone, take care.
Thanks so much, Jim.